Step into the unique world of Doubtful Sound and discover the link between the icy depths and the mountainous forests. With hundreds of kilometres of intricately woven rivers, deltas and canyons reaching 40 kilometres inland, Doubtful Sound is one of 15 fjords in the South Island of New Zealand, each having its own unique web of life. Formed 10 to 14,000 years ago by the retreat of colossal glaciers, the fjord system is up to 420 metres deep and home to all manner of wildlife. As Fiordland receives a lot of water through rain and ice melt, a freshwater layer forms on top of the seawater. Due to a sill at the entrance to the fjords, left behind by the retreating glacier, this fresh water is not immediately washed out to sea, but remains a part of the local ecosystem. As the rain and snowmelt runs through the forest, cannons leach from the soil, staining the freshwater brown. The staining creates a darkness at shallow depths, which mimics that of several hundred metres of submersion and allows deep ocean sea life, such as the black coral, to populate the fjords in easy reach of divers. In order to preserve the unique ecology of this area, studies are constantly being done to find how the changes that are occurring on land are affecting those living in the water. One such study is being carried out by Dr. Stephen Wing.
One of the projects we're doing in Fiordland is to try to understand food web structure using chemical markers to track where carbon or energy comes into the food web and how it gets passed from one type of organism to the next. And the reason that that's important is it lets you understand what sort of differences or changes would occur if the food web structure was interrupted. So if there was if you severed one of the links between the sources of energy and the food web.
A feature of life in the fjords is that some marine animals rely on the land for the majority of their food, and so carbon, yet never leave the water. A marine ecology PhD student, Rebecca McLeod, is also in Fiordland with Dr. Wing, studying food webs.
So my research at the moment is looking at the importance of terrestrial carbon in the marine system in Fiordland. And the reason we're interested in that is because the forest there is virgin forest, and there's a really strong input of vascular plant material into the fjords. And so we're wondering what the fate of that carbon is, whether it just sinks into the sediment and becomes a big carbon sink, or whether it's actually taken up and used by the animals in the system.
A large part of the research in Doubtful Sound is centred around its environmental differences to the open coasts.
The interesting thing about Fiordland, which is quite different than a lot of the other coastal marine areas, is there's a huge and very strong connection between terrestrial processes and marine processes. You see around all the areas around the walls of the fjord where you see terrestrial matter just spilling into the fjords, and if you look at the entrances of the river, you have these huge deltas with lots of terrestrial material coming in, and a lot of that is recaptured by the marine creatures.
With up to 10 metres of rainfall each year, landslides are a common occurrence. vast chunks of plant matter fall into the fjords, where bacteria break it down and absorb it. Once in the food web, the carbon from the plant matter can be identified as it differs from that of marine sources, allowing scientists like Dr. Wing to track the diets of the fish and crustacea. Another researcher in Fjordland is master's student Lucy Jack.
I'm studying the ecological role of crayfish in Fjordland. So I'm studying Jasus edwardsi, or the red spiny rock lobster, and I'm looking predominantly at their position in the food web, what they're eating, and where their primary sources of carbon are from, and also where they're moving.
Different areas have different carbon signatures, which arise from the subtle variances in the quantities of each type of carbon, marine and terrestrial. Using minute samples of crayfish from each area, it can be determined which areas the crayfish are getting their food.
The stable isotope signatures that a crayfish would have if it was resident would be specific to that area that it was resident in. So what we found from work before is that crayfish from inner fjord sites, i.e. at the head of the fjord, have one specific signature which they get from eating the specific kinds of food that is available to them at the head of the fjord. And then at the mouth of the fjord, the crayfish have a different signature because they are getting more pelagic carbon from the ocean coming up in the food chain there. So what you can see is if populations are isolated, then they'll have the crayfish from different places will have completely different signatures.
In the lab, using a mass spectrometer, the samples taken from each area within the fjord can be analysed to find their specific signature that shows their dependence on land-based materials through the ratio of terrestrial to marine carbon signatures. Carbon, in its most common form, has 6 protons and 6 neutrons, and so is called carbon-12. However, a small amount, around 1%, has 6 protons and 7 neutrons, and so is termed carbon-13. While each are identical chemically, they can be separated because carbon-13 is heavier. As terrestrial carbon has a lower ratio of carbon-13 to carbon-12, it follows that a sample from a Fjordland crayfish depending heavily on land-influenced food will have a lower ratio than a coastal crayfish. A similar difference exists in sulfur and nitrogen from each source, allowing scientists to form a unique signature for each environment, much like a fingerprint. Using this research, the government, through the Department of Conservation, can set up and expand marine reserves and commercial exclusion zones. Of 10 marine reserves currently in place in Fjordland, 8 have been established within the past year, with scientific research like that of Dr. Wing, Lucy and Rebecca playing a key role in determining the best placements and sizes of reserves. It is clear that only by knowing what we have can we hope to protect it.